This ranch belongs to my father-in-law now. You can't live here anymore, Dad." Emily's words cut through the air like a sharp knife. I was sitting on the porch of the house I built with my own 2 hands 40 years ago, watching the sunset over my land. My land. Or at least, I thought it was, until that moment. I smiled and nodded. "Okay, sweetie, if that's what you want." But Emily had no idea who she was dealing with. I had spent the whole week getting ready for my daughter's visit. I hadn't seen her in months, and when she called saying she was coming with a big surprise, my heart filled with hope. I thought maybe she had reflected on our relationship, that maybe she wanted to spend more time with me in my golden years. I cleaned the whole house, cooked her favorite meal, even bought fresh flowers to decorate the dining room table. Like a fool, I believed my daughter had come to make peace with me. But when she arrived that Saturday afternoon, she wasn't alone. Daniel, her father-in-law, was with her, wearing a smile I didn't like from the very first moment. It was a cold, calculating smile. Emily barely said hello, and when I asked about my grandson, she said he was busy and couldn't make it. During dinner, I noticed something strange in her behavior. She avoided my gaze, gave one-word answers, and Daniel seemed to be steering the entire conversation. "David," Daniel said as he cut a piece of his steak, "Emily tells me you've been having a hard time maintaining this property." I looked at him, confused. A hard time? My ranch produced enough for me to live comfortably. I had my cows, my crops, my trusted workers. "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied. Emily finally looked up and gave me a look I will never forget. It was a mix of pity and determination that chilled my blood. "Dad, you can't keep living here alone. You're too old, and this responsibility is too much for you." Her words hit me like a lightning bolt. Too old? I had just turned 69. I woke up every morning at 5, personally supervised every corner of my property, and my mind was as clear as spring water. Daniel nodded with fake seriousness. "That's why we've come up with a solution that works for everyone." That's when Emily pulled some papers out of her purse. She spread them on the table as casually as someone pouring coffee. "Dad, I already spoke with my father-in-law. He's going to take over the ranch from now on. He has experience in this field, he knows business, and he can give this land the management it needs." My eyes scanned the documents without fully understanding what I was seeing. There were seals, signatures, and my name appeared in several places. "What does this mean, Emily?" I asked, though a part of me already knew the answer. Daniel leaned forward, adopting a fatherly tone that I found insulting. "David, this means you don't have to worry about a thing anymore. I'll take care of everything. The workers, the crops, the finances, the big decisions. You can rest easy knowing your ranch is in good hands." Emily quickly added, "And don't worry about where you'll live, Dad. You can stay in the back room. It's small but comfortable, and that way you'll be close if we need to ask you anything." The back room, the place where temporary workers had slept during harvest season for years. They wanted to turn me into an employee in my own home. I looked at my daughter, searching for any trace of the little girl who used to run down these same hallways, who helped me feed the chickens, who told me that when she grew up she wanted to be just like her dad. But that little girl was gone. In her place was a woman who saw me as an obstacle, as a problem to be solved. "And if I don't agree?" I asked, though my voice sounded weaker than I wanted. Daniel and Emily exchanged a knowing glance before he answered. "David, you already signed these documents last week when you were in town. Don't you remember?" His tone was condescending, as if he were talking to a small child or someone losing their mind. Sometimes age plays tricks on our memory. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I signed documents? I had never signed anything related to giving away my ranch. My memory was perfect, and I remembered every detail of my last trip to town. I had gone to buy supplies and say hello to some friends in the downtown square. "Nothing more. I didn't sign anything," I said firmly, but Daniel already had his answer ready. "Dad," Emily intervened with a soft but firm voice, "you were very confused that day. Robert, the lawyer, called us, worried because you were saying strange things. You mentioned seeing your dead brother talking to you. My brother had passed away 15 years ago, and I had never had hallucinations or mental problems. It was a blatant lie, but the way she said it, with that mix of feigned concern and sadness, almost made me doubt my own sanity for a moment." Daniel stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my lands as if they were already his. "David, I understand this is hard to accept. Mental decline is a natural part of aging. But don't worry, we'll make sure you have a dignified and peaceful retirement." His words dripped with a cruelty disguised as kindness that turned my stomach. Emily came over to me and put her hand on my shoulder. It was the first time she had touched me all night, and a gesture that should have been comforting felt like a goodbye. Dad, you don't have to carry all these responsibilities anymore. You can rest, read, walk in the garden. Daniel will take care of everything else. The garden. As if I were a decrepit old man being allowed to walk in the yard of a nursing home. I looked at the documents again. The signatures looked authentic, but I knew I had never put my name on those papers. Someone had forged my signature very skillfully. As I processed this monumental betrayal, I heard Daniel whisper something to Emily. "When can we start with the changes we talked about?" he asked in a low voice, but not low enough for me not to hear. "What changes?" I asked, though I had a feeling I wasn't going to like the answer. Emily hesitated a moment before answering. "Well, Dad, some things are going to be different. For example, Daniel thinks we have too many employees. He's going to have to let some of them go to make the operation more efficient. Linda had worked for me for 20 years. Michael had been taking care of my cows since he was a teenager. Stephen knew every square foot of my crops better than I did. Those people depend on these jobs to feed their families," I protested. Daniel turned from the window with a cold smile. "David, you think with your heart, not your head. That's precisely why this ranch hasn't reached its true potential. When I take control, we're going to modernize everything. New techniques, fewer staff, higher productivity." Emily nodded enthusiastically, as if he were talking about something wonderful. "Daniel has a lot of experience in rural administration. He knows how to make a property truly profitable." The word profitable sounded obscene coming from her lips. This ranch had never been just a business to me. It was my life, my legacy, the fruit of 40 years of honest work and sacrifice. "And what about family traditions?" I asked, desperate to find something that would make them reconsider. "This land has been in our family for generations. Your grandfather started with just 5 acres. Emily sighed impatiently. "Dad, that's in the past. Now we have to think about the future, about being competitive, about taking advantage of market opportunities." Daniel returned to the table and sat across from me with the attitude of someone closing a business deal. "David, let me be frank with you. This property is worth a lot of money, but it's being mismanaged. With the right improvements, we could triple its value in less than 2 years." His eyes shone with greed when he mentioned the money, and that's when I understood what his real plan was. "Besides," Daniel continued, "Emily mentioned to me that you've been having some episodes. Forgetting names, getting confused with dates, sometimes not recognizing people." Another lie. My mind was as sharp as ever, but I realized they had been building a narrative about my supposed senile dementia to justify what they were doing. Emily avoided my gaze as she added, "We've also noticed you've lost a lot of weight. Dad, you're not taking good care of yourself. You need someone to be responsible for you." It was true I had lost a few pounds in recent months, but it was because I had been working hard repairing the north fence. Nothing that couldn't be explained by physical labor and a lighter diet. I stood up from the table slowly, feeling the weight of my almost 70 years more than ever. Not from physical fatigue, but from the betrayal I had just discovered. My own daughter, the little girl I had raised alone after her mother died, was stealing everything I had built in my life. "All right," I finally said, with a calmness that surprised even me. "If that's what you've decided, I accept." Daniel and Emily exchanged looks of relief, as if they had expected a fight. "I knew you'd understand, David," Daniel said with false friendliness. "This is what's best for everyone." Emily came over and gave me a kiss on the cheek that felt like the kiss of Judas. "Thanks for understanding, Dad. I'm going to get the back room ready to make it more comfortable for you." That night, while they celebrated in the main dining room of my house, I lay awake in the small room that was now supposedly my home. I could hear their laughter through the thin walls, planning changes to my property as if I were already dead. But they didn't know something important. I was not the foolish, confused old man they thought I was. And that night, I decided they were going to learn a lesson they would never forget. At 3 in the morning, when the laughter in the dining room finally died down, I decided to get up for a glass of water. My bare feet made no noise on the cold tiles as I walked through the hallways of the house I knew like the back of my hand. But as I passed by the study, I heard low voices. Emily and Daniel were still awake, and what I heard chilled my blood. "Are you sure he doesn't suspect anything?" Daniel asked in a whisper. Emily's voice came through clearly. "Not at all. He bought it completely. He was always too trusting, too nice. That's been his weakness his whole life." I pressed closer to the wall, holding my breath so I wouldn't miss a single word of what they were saying. Daniel chuckled softly. Perfect. Tomorrow I'll start contacting the buyers I've already identified. That northern plot is worth a fortune for real estate development. The construction company is willing to pay triple what it's worth as farmland. My heart stopped. Buyers, real estate development? They hadn't just stolen my ranch, they were planning to destroy it completely. And what do we do with him? Emily asked, referring to me as if I were a piece of old furniture to be disposed of. Daniel paused before answering. Well, we already talked about that. With the medical documents we got, it'll be easy to prove he needs specialized care. Once we sell the property, we'll have enough money to put him in a discreet facility. You mean a nursing home? Emily's voice sounded hesitant, as if for the first time all night she had a shred of conscience. Not exactly a nursing home, Daniel replied in a calculating tone. There are other places, cheaper ones, institutions that specialize in difficult cases, people who can no longer care for themselves, places where they don't ask many questions and where visits are limited. I felt my legs tremble. They didn't just want to steal my property. They wanted to lock me up in some horrible place where I could die slowly and silently, without anyone knowing where I was. Emily was silent for a long moment, and for an instant, I thought maybe she had regained some humanity, but her next words shattered my soul. How long do you think it will take to sell everything? She asked in a practical voice, as if she were asking about the weather. With the right contacts, I'd say we could have everything liquidated in 3 months, Daniel answered. The land, the house, the cattle, the machinery, everything. I calculated that after expenses and commissions, we'd be left with about $8 million. Clean. $8 million. 40 years of my life reduced to a number they were going to split between themselves, as if it were money they found on the street. And my share? Emily asked. Daniel laughed softly. Honey, you're my daughter-in-law. Your share is securing your family's future. With that amount, your husband could start the business he's always wanted, your kids could go to the best universities, and you would never have to worry about money again. It's just that sometimes I feel guilty, Emily admitted in a small voice. After all, he is my father. Daniel made a dismissive sound. Emily, your father had his chance to enjoy this property. Now it's time for the new generation to take advantage of what he didn't know how to appreciate. Besides, it's not like we're leaving him on the street. He'll be well taken care of. Well taken care of, as if locking me in a mental institution was an act of charity. I moved away from the door silently, my heart beating so loudly I was afraid they could hear it. I went back to my small room, my mind racing a mile a minute. Now, I fully understood the magnitude of the betrayal. It wasn't just greed. It was a meticulously designed plan to destroy my life and erase my existence. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and took a deep breath. For a few minutes, I let myself feel the bitterness, the rage, the absolute disappointment of discovering my own daughter was capable of such cruelty. But then, something ignited inside me, a cold, determined flame I hadn't felt in years. If they wanted to play dirty, I was going to show them how it was really done. The next morning, I got up early as always, but this time with a different purpose. Emily and Daniel were still sleeping after their long night of celebration, so I had time to think and plan. As I made coffee in the small kitchen of the back room, I mentally reviewed everything I knew about my supposed new owners. Daniel boasted about being a successful businessman, but I had noticed things during dinner that he probably thought went unnoticed. His watch was a cheap imitation, his shoes were worn and repaired, and I had seen how his eyes lit up when he mentioned the value of my property. A truly prosperous man wouldn't have shown such obvious greed. Besides, I knew Emily better than she thought. My daughter had always been ambitious, but also impulsive, and a poor planner. In school, when she cheated on exams, she always made stupid mistakes that gave her away. This time would be no different. Her greed and her rush to get the money would be her downfall. When I went out to the main yard, I found Linda sweeping dry leaves near the entrance. She had been more than an employee all these years. She was practically family. She looked at me with concern as I approached. David, is it true what Miss Emily is saying, that you're not going to run the ranch anymore? Linda had that practical wisdom of women who have seen a lot of the world, and she had always had a sharp instinct for sensing trouble. Linda, I said in a low voice, I need you to do me a very important favor, but it has to be our secret. Her eyes filled with alarm, but she nodded immediately. Whatever you need, David. I want you to go to town and find Robert the lawyer. Tell him to come see me, but don't mention anything to Emily or her father-in-law. Have him make up any excuse to come, like it's a social visit. Linda frowned. Robert the lawyer? Isn't he the one who supposedly helped you with the papers yesterday? I looked at her in surprise. Of course, Linda knew everyone in town, and knew perfectly well that Robert was an honest and upright man who would never have participated in such a sham. That's exactly why I need to talk to him, I said. Someone is using his name for something very dirty, and he has a right to know. While Linda got ready to go to town, I began the first phase of my plan. I decided to play the part they expected of me, that of the confused and submissive old man who accepts everything without protest. When Emily and Daniel finally got up, around noon, they found me sitting on the porch, reading an old newspaper and acting as if I didn't have a care in the world. "Good morning, Dad," Emily greeted me with a forced smile. "How did you sleep in your new room?" The way she emphasized the words, "new room," confirmed that she was enjoying my humiliation. "Very well, sweetie," I replied in a gentle voice. "It's a comfortable and quiet room, perfect for an old man like me." Daniel appeared behind her, already dressed as if he owned the place. He was wearing a white shirt and dress pants, and he walked through my house with the confidence of someone who feels completely in control. "David, I hope you understand that from now on some things are going to change. I'm going to need you to give me all the information about the workers, the contracts, the bank accounts, the suppliers." "Of course," I answered meekly. "Everything is in the desk in the study. The files are organized by year and by subject. I don't think you'll have any trouble finding what you need." Daniel smiled with satisfaction, believing he had won without a fight. "Perfect. Emily and I are going to spend the morning reviewing everything. You can rest easy." I watched them walk away towards the study, carrying boxes and folders like vultures looting a carcass. But I knew something they didn't. In all those files they were so eager to review, they were not going to find the most important information. The real ownership documents, the original deeds, the land titles, were kept in a place they would never think to look. While Emily and Daniel got lost among obsolete folders and documents in the study, I walked calmly towards the old barn at the back of the property. It was a structure my father had built when I was just a boy, and now it looked like it had been abandoned for years. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind some loose boards in the back wall, I had built a small secret compartment where I kept my most valuable documents. There were the original deeds to the ranch, the updated property titles, my real will, and something that would be crucial for what I was planning: a series of photographs and documents I had collected about Daniel over the past few months. Because, you see, I wasn't as naive as they believed. Ever since Emily started bringing her father-in-law to family gatherings, something about him had made me suspicious. A truly successful man doesn't need to show off so much or constantly talk about his important connections and big business deals. So, discreetly, I had done some digging. What I discovered was fascinating. Daniel Miller was not the prosperous businessman he pretended to be. He was a professional con artist with an impressive history of fraud and scams. I had copies of lawsuits against him for real estate fraud in 3 different states. There were documents showing how he had deceived entire families, promising them profitable investments and disappearing with their money. I even had a photograph of him leaving a courthouse, in handcuffs, after one of his trials. My dear Emily had gotten into bed with a venomous snake. But the most interesting thing of all was a document I had obtained through a contact in the city. Daniel had massive debts with dangerous loan sharks, people who don't accept excuses or forgive late payments. He needed money desperately, and my ranch was his lifeline. That explained the rush, the pressure, and the elaborate lie about my supposed dementia. I carefully placed all the documents in a leather bag and returned to the house just as Robert arrived in his old blue Jeep. The lawyer was a man in his 52nd, honest to the bone, who had handled my family's legal affairs for over a decade. His face showed confusion and concern as he got out of the vehicle. "David," he greeted me, taking off his hat. "Linda told me you needed to see me urgently. Is everything all right?" Before I could answer, we heard hurried footsteps. Emily and Daniel had seen the lawyer arrive, and were coming towards us with poorly concealed panic on their faces. "Robert," Daniel exclaimed with a forced smile, "what a coincidence to see you here." The lawyer looked at him strangely. "Coincidence? David sent for me." Daniel's face stiffened. "Oh, right. He probably wants to clarify something about the documents he signed yesterday in your office." Robert frowned deeply. "What documents?" "I haven't seen David in my office in over 2 months, when we renewed his will. The silence that followed was so tense you could cut it with a knife." Emily tried to intervene quickly. "Dad must be confused. You know how he's been lately with his memory." "My memory is perfect," I said firmly, looking directly at Daniel. "Robert, These people have shown me some documents where I supposedly transferred ownership of my ranch to Mr. Miller. Documents I supposedly signed yesterday in your office, in your presence as a notary. Robert's face turned red with indignation. That's impossible. First, because my office was closed all day yesterday for my secretary's funeral. Second, because I would never participate in such a transfer without carefully studying all the legal aspects and making sure David fully understands the implications. Daniel started to get nervous, stammering incoherent excuses. There must be a misunderstanding. Maybe it was another lawyer. There are several in town. But Robert was already examining the documents Emily had placed on a porch table. His expression grew more severe with each page he reviewed. These documents are forgeries, he finally declared in an authoritative voice. David's signature is clearly forged. My seal is a crude imitation, and the format doesn't even match the one we use at the office. Also, there are legal errors that no competent lawyer would have made. He looked at Daniel with eyes full of fury. Sir, this constitutes forgery of official documents, identity theft, and attempted fraud. These are serious crimes. Emily turned pale as a sheet. There must be a mistake. Daniel assured me everything was in order. But Daniel was already backing away towards his car, sweating profusely. I don't know anything about forged documents. Someone tricked me too. They told me everything was legal. Who told you that? Robert asked, in a prosecutor's tone. Daniel kept backing away. I don't remember. It was a while ago. Maybe I got confused. His nervousness was so obvious that even Emily began to realize she had been used. I decided it was time to deliver the final blow of this phase. Robert, I said calmly, I think you should know a few things about Mr. Miller before deciding what to do about this situation. I took out the bag and began to show the documents I had collected. For example, did you know that Mr. Miller has outstanding arrest warrants in 2 states for fraud and forgery? Daniel's face fell completely when he saw the copies of his criminal record. Emily looked at him with growing horror. Daniel, what does this mean? He could no longer maintain the facade of respectability. Emily, I can explain everything. Those are misunderstandings from the past. People who didn't understand my business methods. Business methods, I roared, dropping the mask of the confused old man for the first time. Do you call stealing the life savings of a farming family in Texas a business method? Or swindling a widow in Florida with a fake real estate investment? I had detailed documents on each of his previous victims. Robert took the papers and examined them quickly. His face darkened with each revelation. David, this is very serious. This man is a professional criminal. He turned to Daniel with legal authority. Mr. Miller, I'm going to have to report this situation to the authorities immediately. Forging notarized documents is a federal crime. Daniel was already running towards his car. This is a trap. You set me up, he yelled as he got into the vehicle. Emily ran after him, shouting in confusion. Daniel, wait, explain what's happening. But the engine was already on. And Daniel sped off the property, kicking up a cloud of dust, abandoning my daughter in the middle of the chaos he had created. Emily stood in the road, watching the car disappear, her face twisted with the realization that she had been manipulated and used. She slowly turned to me, with tears in her eyes and a look of total confusion. Dad, I didn't know he was. A con artist? I completed her sentence with a cold voice. A criminal who used you to try to steal everything I have. Emily looked down, unable to meet my eyes. For the first time in this whole nightmare, she seemed to realize the magnitude of what she had done. Robert put all the documents in his briefcase and placed a hand on my shoulder. David, I'm going to file a formal complaint against this Daniel Miller immediately. I'm also going to alert my colleagues in other states so they are aware that he is still operating. He paused and looked at Emily sternly. As for your daughter, technically she also participated in the attempted fraud. Emily looked up sharply, panic in her eyes. Me? But I didn't know the documents were fake. Daniel convinced me everything was legal. Her voice sounded desperate, and for a moment I felt a pang of pity for her. But then I remembered the late-night conversation I had overheard, where they talked about locking me in an institution and selling my land. Emily, I said in a grave voice, there's something else you need to know. Emily looked at me with tear-filled eyes, hoping I would tell her it had all been a misunderstanding, that we could get past it as a family. But I had other words for her. Last night I heard your conversation with Daniel, I said in a slow, cold voice. The whole conversation. Her face turned white as a sheet. What? What conversation, Dad? Her voice trembled, but she still tried to maintain her feigned innocence. Robert watched us both attentively, sensing there was something deeper to this story. The conversation where you talked about selling my ranch for $8 million, I continued relentlessly. The conversation where you planned to lock me up in a mental institution to get rid of me. The conversation where you asked how long it would take to liquidate everything, including the livestock and machinery. Every word was like a slap in the face to her. Emily backed away, stammering desperate denials. No, Dad, you misunderstood. I would never. But her face betrayed her. Guilt was written in every line of her face, in the way she avoided my gaze, in how her hands trembled. I also heard when Daniel explained about the specialized institutions. I added, feeling the cold rage build in my chest. Places where visits are limited, where they don't ask questions, where an inconvenient old man can quietly disappear. Emily began to sob, but I was no longer moved. She wasn't my little girl anymore. She was a stranger who had planned my destruction. Robert cleared his throat, clearly disturbed by what he was hearing. David, if what you're saying is true, we're talking about conspiracy to commit fraud, unlawful confinement, and possibly attempted kidnapping. He looked at Emily with professional severity. Miss, these are very serious charges. I didn't want to hurt him, Emily cried desperately. Daniel convinced me it was for the best. He told me Dad was sick, that he needed special care, that the ranch was too much responsibility for someone his age. She was still lying, trying to shift all the blame to Daniel. Emily, I said with a calmness that surprised me, when you were 8 years old and you broke your mother's favorite vase, you also tried to blame someone else. You said it was the cat, remember? She looked at me, confused by the change of subject. I sat you down at this very porch table and explained that lying only makes things worse, that it's always better to tell the truth and face the consequences. Her sobs intensified, but I continued. That 8-year-old girl finally admitted the truth and promised never to lie again. But that little girl is gone, isn't she? In her place is a woman who coldly planned to rob her father of everything and lock him in a horrible place to die alone and forgotten. Dad, please, she begged, falling to her knees in the dust of the yard. Forgive me. It was a terrible mistake. Daniel manipulated me. He made me believe things that weren't true. But even now, she was still trying to minimize her responsibility. Robert intervened in a professional voice. Miss Emily, I strongly recommend you seek legal representation. What your father has described constitutes a serious criminal conspiracy. The prosecutor's office will want to question you, and anything you say can be used against you. I took my cell phone out of my pocket, a device my supposed mental decline would have prevented me from using correctly. Emily, there's something else you should know. Last night, when I heard your conversation, I didn't just memorize your words, I also recorded them. Her face fell completely when she saw the small device in my hand. That's impossible, she murmured. You don't know how to use those things. But I pressed the play button, and her own voice filled the yard. How long do you think it will take to sell everything? The recording was clear, crisp, incriminating. Hearing her own words planning my destruction shattered her. Robert took the phone and listened to several minutes of the recording with an increasingly grim expression. David, this is crucial evidence. With this recording, the case against both conspirators is solid. He looked at Emily, who was still kneeling on the ground. Miss, I suggest you cooperate fully with the authorities. It's your only hope for leniency. At that moment, we heard the sound of several vehicles approaching up the driveway. Robert had made a call while examining the documents, and now 2 state police patrol cars and an unmarked car that clearly belonged to a detective or prosecutor were arriving. Emily staggered to her feet when she saw the flashing lights of the patrol cars. Dad, please, don't let them arrest me. I'm your daughter. Think about your grandson. He needs me. For the first time, she mentioned my grandson, using the child as an emotional shield. But it was too late for pleas. The first officer to get out was Sheriff Evans, a man I had known for years and who had bought cattle from my ranch on several occasions. David, he greeted me, taking off his cap. Mr. Robert informed us of a serious situation here. Are you all right? I'm perfectly fine, Sheriff, I answered with dignity. But I'm afraid my daughter and her accomplice attempted to commit fraud against my property using forged documents. I handed him the copies of the forged documents and the phone with the incriminating recording. While the sheriff reviewed the evidence, Emily tried one last desperate maneuver. Sheriff Evans, you know my family. My father is sick, confused. Daniel convinced him to do this charade to make me look bad. It was incredible how she kept lying even with the clear evidence against her. But Sheriff Evans knew my reputation in the community. He knew I was an upstanding, hard-working man, with all my mental faculties intact. "Miss Emily," he said in an official tone, "you're going to have to come with us to answer some questions. You have the right to remain silent and to request a lawyer." "No!" she screamed, running towards me with her arms outstretched. "Dad, you can't do this. I'm your only family. Without me, you'll be all alone." Her words revealed what she really thought, that I was a helpless old man who depended on her for survival. "Emily," I said with a deep sadness, but also a firmness I hadn't shown in years, "you stopped being my family the moment you planned to lock me up in an institution and steal everything I built in my life. Family doesn't betray family. Family doesn't conspire to destroy their loved ones." The officers escorted her to the patrol car while she continued to scream protests and pleas. But what hurt me the most was hearing her last words before they closed the vehicle door. "This isn't over. When I get out, I'm going to fight for what's mine. That ranch should be mine, even now. Even after being caught red-handed, she still believed she was entitled to my property. There was no genuine remorse, no real understanding of what she had done, only anger at being caught. Robert approached me as the patrol cars drove away, taking my daughter with them. "David, I know this must be very difficult for you, prosecuting your own daughter." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the situation. "It was necessary, Robert. If I didn't stop her now, she would have found another way to try." "What will you do now?" he asked with genuine concern. I looked out at my ranch, at the lands I had worked for 40 years, at the house I had built with my own 2 hands. "I'm going to keep living," I said simply, "and I'm going to make sure that when I'm gone, this land goes to people who truly value it." But my story wasn't over yet. Daniel was still free, and I was certain that such a desperate and dangerous man would not give up easily. For the next 3 days, a tranquility I hadn't felt in months returned to my ranch. Without Emily and Daniel circling like vultures, I could get back to my normal routine, waking at dawn, checking the livestock, supervising the crops, and talking with my workers, without feeling like every word was being analyzed for signs of mental decline. Linda was back to working in the main house, and the joy on her face was evident. "David," she said while making lunch, "everyone in town is talking about what happened. People are proud of how you stood up for yourself. Many have been victims of con artists like that, Daniel." Michael, my cattle foreman, also expressed his relief. "Boss, when we heard Miss Emily was going to fire us all, we were very worried. Our families depend on this work." I assured him that as long as I was alive and in control of the ranch, everyone would have a secure job. But my peace was interrupted on Wednesday afternoon when Robert arrived with troubling news. "David, I have information about Daniel Miller that you need to know." His expression was grave as he sat with me on the porch. "The police tracked his vehicle to a hotel in the city," Robert continued, "but when they arrived to arrest him, he had already fled. Apparently, someone tipped him off that they were looking for him." This news didn't surprise me. A man with Daniel's criminal experience would know how to evade the authorities. "There's more," Robert added with growing concern. "Before he fled, Daniel was seen talking to several suspicious-looking individuals, men who, according to the description, could be the loan sharks he owes money to." My blood ran cold. If Daniel had told them about my ranch, we could be facing a much more dangerous situation. "What do you suggest we do?" I asked, though I already had my own ideas. Robert leaned forward. "I think we should increase security on the property, and we should also consider temporarily moving the most important documents to a safe deposit box at the bank." That same night, as I was reviewing papers in my study, I heard a strange noise outside. It was around midnight, and it sounded like someone was cutting the fence near the perimeter. I silently approached the window and saw the lights of several flashlights moving near the old barn. These were not common thieves. They moved with too much organization, too much precision. I counted at least 5 figures in the dark. I took my old hunting rifle and discreetly dialed Sheriff Evans' number, whispering the situation over the phone. "David, don't put yourself at risk," the sheriff warned me. "Stay inside the house. My men are on their way." But as he spoke, I saw one of the figures heading directly towards the main house. He was carrying something in his hands that looked like a crowbar or an iron rod. I turned off all the lights in the house and positioned myself strategically near the front door. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. I had faced difficult situations before, and I wasn't going to let some criminals intimidate me in my own home. The man reached the porch and began to force the door. Through the crack in the curtain, I could see he was wearing a mask and gloves. He was clearly a professional. When he finally managed to open the door, he entered slowly. shining a small flashlight. "Search the study," I heard someone whisper from outside. "The old man must have the property documents somewhere." It was Daniel's voice. He had come personally to steal what he couldn't get through deceit. The intruder headed towards the study, and I followed him silently down the hall. When he turned on the study light and began to go through my desk, I decided to act. "Are you looking for something in particular?" I said from the doorway, pointing my rifle at him. The man jumped and dropped the flashlight, but quickly regained his composure. "Stupid old man," he growled in a threatening voice. "You should be asleep. This doesn't have to get complicated. We just want the papers for the house. The only papers you're going to get tonight are your death certificates, if you don't get off my property immediately," I replied with a surprising calm. The man laughed, clearly underestimating a 69-year-old man. Really? A grandpa with an old rifle is going to stop 5 armed men. His arrogance was his mistake. He didn't know I had been a military marksman in my youth, nor that this old rifle was perfectly maintained and loaded. At that moment we heard the sirens of the patrol cars approaching quickly. The intruder's face changed from mockery to panic. "Daniel!" he yelled outside. "The police!" Immediately, there was a great commotion in the yard, with shouts and footsteps running in all directions. The man in the study tried to run for the door, but I blocked his path. "Not so fast, friend. You're going to stay right here until the authorities arrive." He made a move to pull something from his jacket, but the sound of my rifle's safety clicking off made him reconsider. "You're crazy, old man!" he yelled at me, but he stayed where he was. Outside, the shouting intensified as the patrol cars arrived, with sirens blaring. We heard shots fired into the air and orders to halt, followed by more shouting and the sound of people running through the trees. Sheriff Evans entered the house with 2 officers, finding us exactly as we were, me pointing the rifle at the intruder, who had his hands up in defeat. "David, are you all right?" the sheriff asked, as his men handcuffed the criminal. "Perfectly fine, Sheriff, but I'm afraid your friend Daniel escaped with some of his accomplices." The sheriff nodded. "We managed to capture 3 of them, including this one, but you're right, Daniel got away in the dark. He knows the area well." During the interrogation that followed, the captured man confirmed what I already suspected. Daniel had promised them a large sum of money if they helped him retrieve some important documents from my ranch. He had told them I was a senile old man who wouldn't put up a fight. Daniel assured us it would be easy, the criminal confessed. He said the old man was crazy and no one would believe him if he reported the robbery. He promised us $200,000 each when he sold the property. It was clear that Daniel had also lied to his accomplices, promising them money he could never have paid. Sheriff Evans immediately issued an expanded search warrant for Daniel, including alerts at airports and bus stations. "David, this man is more dangerous than we thought. He's not going to give up easily, especially now that he's desperate." Over the next few days, I reinforced the security of the ranch. I hired 2 security guards for night shifts and installed surveillance cameras at the most vulnerable points of the property. Robert also arranged to move all the important documents to a safe deposit box in the city's central bank. But I knew Daniel wasn't finished. A man so desperate, with such large debts and so few options, would eventually make another move. And when he did, I would be ready. What I didn't know was that his next plan would be the boldest and most dangerous of all. A week after the attempted robbery, Linda came to the house with alarming news from town. "David, there are strange rumors circulating. People are saying you're very sick, that you've been acting strangely, that maybe you need medical help." I asked her for more details. "According to what they told me at the market, someone has been spreading the story that you have severe dementia, that you sometimes become violent, and that your family is very worried about your safety." My blood ran cold. Daniel was planting the seeds for his next move. The rumors about my supposed dementia spread through the town like wildfire in a dry season. It was a meticulously planned smear campaign. Daniel had learned from his past mistakes and was now attacking my credibility on multiple fronts. Every day brought new reports from people who had heard increasingly elaborate versions of my mental decline. According to the circulating stories, I had been seen talking to myself at the market, confusing people, and even losing control in social situations. Obviously, it was all lies, but Daniel knew that people tend to believe gossip more than the truth, especially when it comes to the elderly. The hardest blow came when Dr. Martinez, my lifelong doctor, called me, concerned. "David, I've received calls from several people asking about your mental health. Someone who identified himself as a social services official even wanted information about your ability to live independently." I immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Daniel was trying to build an official case of mental incapacity that would allow him to legally gain control of my property. If he could convince the authorities that I was incompetent, they could assign him or Emily legal guardianship over my assets. "Doctor," I said urgently, "I need you to do a full evaluation of my mental state and have it officially recorded. I want medical exams, psychological tests, everything necessary to prove that I am completely lucid." Dr. Martinez agreed immediately, concerned about the implications of what was happening. That same afternoon, as I was preparing my strategy to counter the rumors, I received an unexpected visit. An official car pulled up in front of my house, and a smartly dressed woman with a briefcase got out. She identified herself as Patricia Salinas from the Department of Social Services for Seniors. "David," she said in a professional but friendly tone, "we've received reports of concern about your well-being. It's standard procedure to do an evaluation when we are informed of possible cases of vulnerability in older adults." Her words sounded official, but there was something in the way she spoke that made me suspicious. I invited her into the living room and served her coffee while we talked. Her questions started innocently, about how I managed to live alone, if I had trouble remembering things, if I had had episodes of confusion. I answered calmly and precisely, clearly demonstrating that my mind was perfectly fine. But then her questions became more specific and suspicious. "I understand you recently had a conflict with your daughter over the management of your property. Don't you think it would be more convenient to have help managing such complex matters?" The way she said it confirmed that this was not a routine visit. "Miss Salinas," I said, looking her directly in the eye, "who exactly reported these supposed concerns about my mental state?" She hesitated for a moment before answering. "The information comes to us through various channels. Concerned family members, community members, health professionals." I decided to test her. "Could you tell me exactly what specific behaviors were reported and by whom?" Her discomfort became obvious. "Well, that information is confidential, but episodes of aggression, temporary confusion, and difficulty making important decisions were mentioned." At that moment, my phone rang. It was Robert, and his voice sounded alarmed. "David, I need to talk to you urgently. I've just discovered something very important about your visitor." I told him to call me back in 5 minutes and hung up. "Ma'am," I said with renewed suspicion, "could you show me your official identification again?" When she handed me her card, I examined it carefully. It looked authentic, but something was off. The phone number had an area code that didn't correspond to the local government offices. When Robert called back, I put the phone on speaker. "David, Patricia Salinas was fired from the Department of Social Services 6 months ago for irregularities in her work. The woman in your house is an imposter." The silence that followed was deafening. The fake official stood up abruptly, clearly nervous. "There must be some misunderstanding. My identification is valid, but she was already gathering her things hastily. I have to get to another appointment. We'll be in touch to continue the evaluation." "You're not going anywhere," I said with authority, blocking her path to the door. "You're going to stay here until the police arrive." She tried to push past me, but she underestimated the strength of a man who has worked in the fields his whole life. I held her firmly by the arm. "Let me go." "This is kidnapping," she yelled, but I had already dialed Sheriff Evans' number. While we waited for the police to arrive, I searched her briefcase. Inside, I found blank documents from the Department of Social Services, several fake official seals, and most tellingly, a cell phone with text messages from Daniel. The messages were incriminating. Daniel had paid her to pose as an official and evaluate my mental competence. The plan was for her to write a false report declaring me incapable of managing my own affairs, which Daniel would use to request my forced commitment. When Sheriff Evans arrived with his officers, the woman finally confessed. Her name was Patricia Ruiz. She was a former government employee fired for corruption, and Daniel had promised her $50,000 for her participation in the fraud. She had done this before for other con artists. "David," the sheriff said as they handcuffed the woman, "he's more dangerous and cunning than we thought. He's mounting a full operation to strip you of everything you have." I nodded gravely. "Sheriff, this is no longer just an attempted scam. It's a systematic campaign of destruction." Over the next few days, I worked intensely with Robert to legally protect my situation. We completed all the official medical and psychological evaluations, which confirmed my perfect mental health. We also established an irrevocable trust to protect my property from any future attempts of dispossession. But Daniel hadn't given up. 2 days later, Linda came running to the house with alarming news. "David, They're saying in town that you violently attacked a social worker, that you hit her and threatened her with a weapon. The smear campaign had reached a new level. According to the rumors, I had had a psychotic episode when the official came to help me, which confirmed I was a danger to myself and others. Daniel had turned my legitimate defense against his accomplice into evidence of my supposed madness. That night, as I reflected on the situation, I realized that Daniel had made a crucial mistake. In his desperation to discredit me, he had revealed more information than he should have about his whereabouts and connections. The messages on Patricia's phone included details about his current location. I called Sheriff Evans. "Sheriff, I think we have enough information to locate Daniel, but we need to act fast, before he realizes his plan has failed and flees for good." The sheriff agreed to organize an operation for that same night. But before we could act, Daniel made his most desperate and dangerous move. The next morning he arrived at my ranch, accompanied by 2 large, threatening men. This time he wasn't sneaking around. He came to confront me directly, and from the look on his face, he was ready for anything. He got out of the vehicle with a cruel smile and walked directly towards where I was feeding the chickens. "David," he yelled from a distance, "it's time for you and me to settle this like men." His companions positioned themselves strategically, blocking the exits. I slowly dropped the container of corn for the chickens and turned to face Daniel with apparent calm, although inside my heart was racing. His 2 companions were clearly dangerous men. One was tall and muscular with scars on his arms, the other smaller but with the cold eyes of a predator. Both had suspicious bulges under their jackets. "Daniel," I said in a firm voice, "I see you've finally decided to show your true colors." He came closer, with that arrogant smile I had grown to hate so much. "David, you've caused me a lot of problems. Because of you, I lost a lot of money, my reputation is ruined, and now I have very dangerous people after me." I stood still, assessing the situation. We were in the main yard, in plain sight from the road, but it was early, and there was no traffic. Linda had gone to town for supplies, and my workers were in the distant fields. I was practically alone with these 3 criminals. "That's not my problem, Daniel," I replied, maintaining my calm. "You chose to be a con artist. You chose to manipulate my daughter. You chose to try and rob me." His smile faded and his expression darkened. "You know what, you stupid old man? I'm tired of games. You're going to sign a property transfer. Right here, right now, or things are going to get very ugly." One of his men stepped forward and pulled out a gun, pointing it directly at my chest. "You see this, Grandpa? This isn't a negotiation anymore. It's an order." The other man pulled folded documents from his jacket. They had evidently come prepared with fake papers ready for my forced signature. Daniel laughed cruelly. "I thought you were smart, David, but you turned out to be just as foolish as your daughter. Did you really think I was going to give up after everything I've invested in this project?" He walked onto the porch of my house as if he already owned it. "This property is worth more than $10 million. I'm not going to let a senile old man take that opportunity away from me. And after you sign," he added with malice, "you're going to have a little accident. Very tragic. An old man who fell and hit his head while feeding his animals. These things happen all the time on farms." His words confirmed that they didn't plan on leaving me alive to tell the story. I looked around discreetly, searching for any advantage. My rifle was inside the house, too far to be useful, but near where I was standing was a long-handled shovel I had been using to clean the pen. It wasn't much, but it might give me a chance if I could distract them. "You know what's the most pathetic part of all this?" Daniel continued, clearly enjoying my apparent helplessness. "Your own daughter gave me all the information I needed about this property. She drew me a complete map of where you kept your important documents, explained your daily routines, even told me about your health problems. Those words hurt me more than the physical threats. Knowing that Emily had voluntarily provided information that was now being used to plan my murder was a betrayal that cut deep. But it also filled me with a cold, determined rage I hadn't felt in years. "Daniel," I said in a voice that sounded calmer than I felt, "there's something you and Emily never understood." I slowly moved towards the shovel, feigning resignation. "You thought that because I'm old, I'm weak. You thought that because I live alone, I'm vulnerable." The man with the gun laughed. "And what are you going to do, Grandpa? Fight 3 armed men?" But I had noticed something they hadn't seen. Since they arrived, I had been hearing the distant sound of engines approaching from the back road of the property. "What you don't know," I continued, keeping their attention, "is that when I was young, I served in the army. And when you're a soldier, you learn that experience always beats youth." At that moment, I recognized the specific sound of the engines. It was Michael and Stephen's motorcycles, my most trusted workers. Daniel frowned, starting to suspect that something wasn't right. Stop talking nonsense and sign the papers. But I had miscalculated the timing. The engines were still too far away, and I needed to buy more time. There's something else you don't know, I added, taking another step towards the shovel. Last night, when I knew you were coming, I didn't just call the local police. I also contacted the FBI. Do you know why? Daniel's expression changed from confidence to concern. Because your little scam operation isn't just a local crime, I continued. You've used forged federal documents, you've crossed state lines, and you've involved corrupt government officials. This is now a federal case. I was obviously lying, but the seed of doubt was planted. The smaller man started to get nervous. Daniel, this is getting too complicated. Maybe we should reconsider. But Daniel was too desperate to back down now. Shut up. He's trying to scare us. There's no FBI. There's no one coming to save him. It was then that we clearly heard the sound of the motorcycles entering the backyard. Daniel turned sharply, confused. Who are they? The man with the gun was also distracted, looking back to see where the noise was coming from. That was my chance. I lunged for the shovel and grabbed it with both hands, spinning quickly to hit the armed man in the ribs. The blow was accurate and hard, and he doubled over in pain, dropping the gun. Michael and Stephen appeared, running from behind the house, each armed with work machetes. Boss! Michael shouted. We saw the strange cars and came to see if you were okay. Daniel's second man tried to draw his weapon, but Stephen was already on him with the machete raised. Don't even think about it, pal. Daniel backed away towards his vehicle, shouting confused orders to his men. Kill them! Kill them all! But his accomplices were clearly outmatched and disoriented. The man I had hit was still writhing on the ground, and the other had Stephen's machete at his throat. I picked up the fallen gun and pointed it at Daniel. The game is over, I told him with authority. You're not getting away this time. But Daniel was more cunning than I had calculated. As I spoke, he had been backing towards his car, and now he quickly got in and started the engine. This isn't over, old man, he yelled at me through the window. I'm going to destroy you if it's the last thing I do. He floored the accelerator and sped down the driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust and leaving his 2 men behind. Michael was already dialing the police on his cell phone. Sheriff Evans, this is Michael from David's Ranch. We need patrols urgently. We just captured 2 armed men who were threatening the boss. The abandoned criminals stood motionless, clearly defeated. While we waited for the police to arrive, I interrogated the 2 men. The more nervous one finally spoke. Sir, we just work for money. Daniel promised us $100,000 each to accompany him and intimidate you. We didn't know it was going to get so violent. Where is Daniel hiding? I asked authoritatively. The man hesitated, but the pressure was too much. He has a hideout in an abandoned house near the river, about 20 kilometers north. But he's probably gone from there after this. When the patrols arrived, Sheriff Evans listened to the whole story with an increasingly grave expression. David, this Daniel is like a cockroach. Every time we think we have him, he finds a way to escape. They arrested the 2 accomplices, but I knew that Daniel was still free and more dangerous than ever. That night, as I reinforced the security of my property with more guards, I reflected on everything that had happened. Daniel had shown that he was willing to go as far as murder to get my ranch, but he had also made a crucial mistake. He had revealed his total desperation, and a desperate man makes mistakes. It was time to end this, once and for all. The following days were a strange mix of tension and determination. I knew Daniel hadn't given up, but I also knew his desperation was making him reckless. A smart criminal would have fled the country after the failure of his last attempt. But Daniel had too many debts, too many enemies, and too much wounded pride to simply disappear. Sheriff Evans had arranged for regular patrols around my property, but I had a feeling that Daniel would try something more useful this time. His brute force methods had failed, so he would likely return to the manipulation and deceit that were his true specialty. My intuition proved correct on Friday morning when I received a call that changed everything. It was Emily, calling from jail. Her voice sounded different, more humble, broken, desperate. Dad, she said with a trembling voice, I need to talk to you. It's very important. It's about my son, my grandson, the only innocent member in this whole situation. What about him, Emily? I asked, feeling my heart race. Daniel took him, she replied between sobs. My husband was at work, and Daniel came to the house saying it was a family emergency. He took the boy, and now we don't know where they are. My blood ran cold. Using an innocent child as a bargaining chip was the most despicable act Daniel could commit. When did this happen? I asked, already calculating my next move. 2 days ago. Last night Daniel called me here at the jail. He says he won't hurt the boy if you voluntarily hand over the ranch to him. For the first time in this whole nightmare, Emily sounded genuinely remorseful. Dad, I know I've done terrible things. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But please, my son is not to blame for any of this. He's just an 8-year-old boy. Her crying intensified. Daniel says if you don't give him what he wants by Sunday, he's going to disappear with the boy forever. I looked at the calendar. It was Friday. I had less than 48 hours to resolve the most complex and dangerous situation of my life. One wrong move and I could lose my grandson forever. Emily, I said in the firmest voice I could manage, I need you to tell me exactly what Daniel told you. Every word, every detail. According to Emily, Daniel had called from a payphone and given her specific instructions. I was to go alone to the bank on Sunday morning, completely transfer the ownership of the ranch to his name, and then go to a location he would specify for the exchange. If I involved the police or tried any tricks, the boy would disappear forever. I hung up the phone and immediately called Sheriff Evans. But when I explained the situation, his response worried me. David, this complicates everything. If he really has the boy, we can't risk a traditional police operation. A desperate criminal with a hostage is unpredictable. I spent the rest of Friday and all of Saturday carefully planning every detail of what would be my final showdown with Daniel. But this time I wasn't going to fight with my own resources alone. Throughout all these months of conflict, I had been gathering information on Daniel, and now I had contacts he never imagined I would have. On Saturday night, I made a call to Washington, D.C., that I had been considering for weeks. It was to an old Army buddy who now worked for the FBI. Carlos, I said when he answered, I need a huge favor, and it's a life-or-death situation. I explained the whole situation, the scam, the murder attempts, and now the kidnapping. Carlos listened without interrupting, and when I finished, his response was immediate. David, this sounds like the work of a criminal we've been tracking for years. Give me every detail you have on this Daniel Miller. It turned out Daniel was known to federal authorities as part of a larger network of fraudsters operating in several states. The kidnapping of my grandson had turned this into a top priority federal case. Don't do anything until tomorrow, Carlos instructed me. We'll be ready to move when he makes contact. Sunday dawned gray and tense. At 7 inches the morning, as promised, Daniel called me. His voice sounded different, more controlled, colder, more dangerous. David, I hope you've made the right decision. I assured him I was ready to make the exchange. Perfect, he replied with satisfaction. Go to the bank at exactly 9, sign all the transfer papers, then drive alone to the abandoned church of Street Michael, at mile 15 on the mountain road. Arrive at exactly 11. If I see any police vehicles, or if you bring anyone with you, you will never see your grandson again. He hung up before I could answer. I immediately called Carlos to inform him of the location. Perfect, he said. We know that place. It's an isolated area, but we have ways of getting into position without being detected. David, I need you to trust us and follow our instructions exactly. At 9 o'clock sharp, I was at the bank, signing documents that transferred my ranch to Daniel Miller's name. The bank manager, who knew the whole situation, had prepared special documents that looked authentic but included clauses that would automatically void them once the case was resolved. Robert was present as a witness, with a look of deep concern. David, this is very dangerous. A man who kidnaps children is capable of anything. I assured him I had a plan, though I myself wasn't entirely sure it would work. At 10:30, I headed towards the abandoned church of Street Michael. It was a colonial building that had been damaged by an earthquake years ago and was never repaired. It was surrounded by wasteland and thick trees, a perfect place for a clandestine exchange or to make someone disappear forever. When I arrived at exactly 11, I saw Daniel's car parked in front of the church. He was standing in the main entrance, and next to him was my grandson. The boy looked scared but unharmed. When he saw me, he tried to run to me, but Daniel held him back firmly. "Grandpa!" the boy shouted, and my heart broke seeing the fear in his eyes. Daniel smiled at me with cruel triumph. "David, I see you've finally understood who's in control here." I approached slowly, my hands visible, showing I was unarmed. "Daniel," I said in a calm voice, "you have what you wanted. The papers are signed. The property is yours. Now let the boy go." He laughed contemptuously. "Do you really think it's that simple? You've caused me too many problems. You've cost me a lot of money and a lot of time, It was then I knew he had never planned to let me live. The exchange was just a way to lure me to an isolated place where he could eliminate me without witnesses. "The boy is coming with me," Daniel continued. "He's going to be my guarantee that you will never interfere in my business again." At that moment, when I thought all was lost, I heard the sound I had been waiting for, the almost imperceptible hum of surveillance drones flying over the area. The FBI had arrived. Daniel also heard the sound and looked up with growing alarm. "What is that?" he asked nervously. But before he could react, amplified voices filled the air. "Daniel Miller, you are surrounded. Release the child and get on the ground immediately." Tactical teams emerged from the surrounding trees with a military precision that reminded me of my service days. Daniel panicked, grabbing my grandson tighter and backing into the church. "It's a trap!" he shouted. "You betrayed me!" But it was too late. The federal agents had the situation completely under control. "Daniel," I shouted, "it's time to end this. Let the boy go, and no one will get hurt." But he had completely lost his mind. Years of scams, debts, and desperation had finally broken him. The operation was executed with professional perfection. In less than 5 minutes, Daniel was handcuffed on the ground, and my grandson was running into my arms. "Grandpa," the boy cried, "I thought I'd never see you again." I hugged him with all my strength, feeling like I could finally breathe easy. 3 hours later, I was back at my ranch, my grandson safe, Daniel arrested to face federal charges, and the nightmare finally over. Carlos called me that afternoon to inform me that Daniel had confessed to everything. The previous scams, the manipulation of Emily, the murder attempts, and the kidnapping. That night, as my grandson slept in the room that had been his mother's when she was little, I sat on the porch where it had all begun weeks ago. Robert had come to confirm that all the fraudulent documents had been voided and my property was completely secure. "David," he said as we drank coffee under the stars, "what you did took a lot of courage. Not many men your age would have faced such a dangerous situation." I smiled at him, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in months. "Robert," I replied, "when someone threatens your family and tries to steal your life's work, age stops mattering. What matters is defending what's right." I looked out at my lands, at the house I had built with my own hands, at the legacy I could now pass on to the right generations. Emily would still face the legal consequences of her actions, but her son would be safe and loved. And as for me, I had learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, never too late to fight for justice, and never too late to protect those who truly matter. Today, I had finally retired, not from a job, but from a life of being underestimated.